let's get right into it. We'll start with the first game. I don't want to jinx it, but I'm kind of overlooking it. Is there anything to be scared about Mount St. Mary's or what is it? I can't even remember the other one.
Texas Southern.
Texas Southern. See, there you go. Is there anything to worry about with this game?
I don't think so. They're the two worst teams in the field, according to Ken Palm. So I short prep, whatever else, but they're very different teams. So maybe harder to prep for depending on who wins one way or the other. But I don't see it really as. I feel like my brand is kind of just hyping up these first round matchups to be good regardless. I've done the same thing with Montana 2 years in a row. So yeah. I can't even really do that for this game.
No, it's good. I mean, I think everyone's probably overlooking it. Everyone's scared because of what happened to Virginia, but it's not going to be really big of an issue. I am curious with LSU and St. Bonaventure. I've watched a little bit of them, some of the St. Bonaventure game. I just don't know. I don't know who's going to come out of that. But let's start with LSU. I guess they have some talent. They have some guys that came into LSU high ranked. The one thing I'm curious about is what is the big guy's name? Waterfed or something like that?
Watford.
Is there anybody to even match up with Hunter? This is who I'm looking at with every single team.
Yeah, it's funny because like following this team through the Big Ten, they're so kind of bogged down with all these great bigs every week. But then if you look around the country, there's not really a lot of great bigs in every other league. Like if you take the top big men from the Big Ten, they're probably like 6 or 7 of the top 10 bigs in the country. So I do think that's an interesting way to look at some of these early games is who on earth is going to guard Hunter Dickinson, because there's not a Kofi Coburn on most of these teams to just stand in his way. And if you think back when Hunter was playing really well, it was when he was going against teams first time through, teams that don't have a lot of size, and just kind of dominated those games. So I think I don't see anyone on LSU's roster to really do that. I don't think LSU really cares about playing much defense either. So I think it's more just going to be, they're going to try to play a shootout with whoever they play and try to win 85-80 and see what happens.
Is there anything on St. Bonaventure that you see? I see even less.
Yeah, this is a funny matchup because it's one of those games where like you see LSU has dudes, right? They're all really good, like they're talented. And on paper, you're like, man, this team should be amazing.
Right.
And then they're an 8 seed and you're like, well, how did we get here? So they play like, it just feels like a classic 8-9 game where St. Bonaventure is more of the complete team. They're going to control the game. They're going to slow it down, play defense. And then like, it's just kind of like what you think of an A-10 team that doesn't have an overwhelming amount of talent maybe, but it's just a really solid team all around.
One thing I think when you mentioned that, like LSU wants to just score, not really worry about defense, but Michigan's issues of late to me have been on the offensive end and kind of just looking around, seeing who's going to make plays, who's going to step up. So if Michigan comes around with one of those games where they start out slow again and just looking around, nobody really steps up, it's one game. LSU can just shoot them out of the gym, no problem. Like even if they're a lesser team. So what do you see as the point of attack for Michigan's offense going into the tournament?
Yeah, I do think it's Hunter, like you said, and that's really what it comes down to with some of these games. Like LSU on any given night, like they're the far more variable team, right? I don't think like they could just run you out of the gym in a half and all of a sudden you don't know what happened really. I think the kind of the thing that I look back, like Big Ten teams all play pretty good transition defense. And like, it's not like you're going to get into some of these run and gun games you might see in the SEC. Like, I don't know if you watched any of that Alabama LSU game, but they're basically just running up and down the court, firing up threes every 8 seconds, right? You don't really play that way in the Big Ten. So I think that Michigan's ability to, even if they're not making all their shots, they're not going to just give up 25 points in transition in a game, right? Like they have that going for them, but it is a risk. Like if you just get into a shootout, like without Isiah Livers, you look at, maybe you start to doubt yourself a little bit and get in an early hole.
Yeah, definitely. It takes me back to when we played Tennessee.
I was going to say the same
junior
thing.
And blew them out. And they were like so worried about playing to the style of the Big Ten and against our zone. And like, they just forgot how to play basketball. So sometimes teams will just get into the game and just lose their minds. And they had all the talent in the world to beat us. And I remember they're focusing so much on the 1-3-1 and, a couple of days before the game, like me and Beeline and Zach were laughing, like we don't even play 1-3-1. Like couldn't even care less about playing that zone. We hate it, but we played it and they just looked at each other. So I guess it'll be interesting. I think one thing maybe Michigan can do with a team like that is create turnovers, and guys like Sean D and Franz will be big in that area, Hunter as well. So I'm interested though with your perspective on losing Livers and what you've seen in the past couple games, because Livers was basically non-existent, in the game that he played injured. And then in the last game, they had a rough game offensively. Every game they've lost, they've shot horribly from three. Where, what have you seen, I guess, from that standpoint with their offense? Because that's the only thing I'm really focused on.
Yeah, it's funny because like Isiah had played poorly for 3 or 4 games there. He just was like, you could tell something wasn't really right, and it turns out he had this stress injury. But it's different. Even if Isiah is missing shots, him being on the court, even playing poorly, has a very different effect on the defense, right? You're not gonna. The other team didn't know he was hurt, so they're gonna play him like he's Isiah Livers, shoots 45% from 3, and you can't just play off of him, right?
Yep.
So I think the first time we really saw that was like the Maryland game. What happened was he didn't play, and then Michigan played with Sean D. Brown because they're in the middle of a game. He's the guy who knows what's going on. And I thought offensively that group looked pretty good. They played for a pretty long stretch there in the second half. Phil Martelli just was actually running the team at that point and rode with him in that spot. I think Johns came in for like 2 possessions and then sat back down. So it looked good there. And then I think in the Ohio State game, you saw, okay, this is what a team can do when they're going into a game knowing that Michigan maybe won't have another shooter at the 4. Because that's really what Isiah does, is creates a huge mismatch for every team, right? You have to decide, are we going to play a guard there and try to bother him? Are we going to have a complete mismatch when we have a bigger forward trying to guard him? And Livers has really done well against those. When John's there, if you watch the Ohio State game, they would put Justin Arns on Johns. They would put it was basically their spot to hide someone or cheat off. And that makes it really hard to run offense. And I think that's the risk, right? Like Johns was productive and he can do some different things, but over a game prep where people kind of know what you're doing, I think it does create some spacing issues for Michigan's offense just because of how you get to that spacing with a guy who maybe you don't trust to hit a lot of threes, right? Like if you're going against Michigan, I'm going to say Brandon Johns hit 4 threes and try to beat us because I will take those odds. So I think that's the biggest issue.
I mean, I think, Johns is a huge key for Michigan right now. And even if it's just 4 baskets, efficient, 4 for 5 or something like that. There was one drive I saw of Maryland. He took it baseline. And I was like, yeah, that's a high level drive. Like this is what Brandon Johns is capable of doing. And then the next game against Ohio State, and I was actually at the game, and he's catching it. He caught one from 15 feet, very capable of shooting from there, pretty open, could have gotten it off very easily, and then just hesitated. And I'm like, I understand that he's had this role all year, but is he a guy that has to step up, or can he just play within himself, get those 4 or 5 baskets and play smart?
Yeah, I think Sean D. Brown has the same problem where he had a very specific role all season, but I think once someone's out, whether it's Eli was out earlier or Isiah's out, I think he feels kind of a little pressure to, just based on how he plays, it seems like he feels a little pressure to maybe try to do a little more, right? To play more like maybe he played at Wake Forest when he had a larger role, kind of try to create his own shot more. And I don't know that Michigan needs either of those guys to like be a creator. They need them to just do what they do and just let Franz create more, let Hunter Dickinson create more. That's where you can shift some of that playmaking. So I do think it's key to figure out you're not Isiah Livers, just be yourself in those moments and then play differently based on if it's Johns on the court, if it's Sean D. Brown on the court, Terrence Williams. So it's a balance. The tricky part is they're not on film playing like this, so teams aren't really going to know what to expect, but they also just haven't had reps playing like this. Like these lineups, it's not like they were sometimes lineups. They just didn't play with these lineups all season. So I think that's going to be really interesting, like how much you can figure out in not a lot of time.
I think kind of the same goes with Mike Smith, where he's realizing now, okay, maybe I got to go back to some of the Columbia days, even though he's distributing more than he did back then or last year with them. But I feel like Sean D's not afraid. Sean D's never been afraid of anybody or anything. But Mike, if Franz isn't going to step up, Mike's already has the ball a lot, and they seem to start the offense through him. They don't go super fast in some possessions, and then they kind of get a little stagnant, and then Mike just has the ball. I think Mike is realizing that. I hope he carries it over. I just kind of, I'm hoping Franz picks it up, but do you foresee more of the same Big Ten tournament style where Mike is really ball dominant?
I think the defensive plan against Michigan, especially even with when Isaiah Livers was in the team, is that like Mike Smith wants to pass, and if you're going to let him pass to pros, you're going to probably lose. So your best bet is to try to do everything you can to make him be a scorer, right? And he can, like the Maryland game, he had that great game, and he's capable of scoring in those spots. But I just think that's what teams are going to sell out to do defensively. And if they're able to take away, like if Mike can get downhill and find other people, it's basically game over, and Michigan's offense is going to be fine. If you can shut down everything else and make him score one-on-one, you might have a chance, and it's going to be a little more of a variable situation.